Welcome to the Deer Society podcast. Here's your host, Brian Lemke.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in to the Deer Society podcast. I'm Brian Lemke, joined by JJ Ducart, Brian Clary, and special guest, Andy Orr. What's up, Andy?
How you doing, Brian?
Doing good, man. Today we're talking about food sources and habitat and strategies surrounding both. So we're going to talk a little bit about food plots. We're going to talk a little bit about different types of habitat and different food sources and strategies around how to hunt them throughout the season. So a lot of strategy talk here. Andy, you obviously with AWS, I mean, your life is in the timber, in the field. You get to deal with a lot of different types of habitat, a lot of different types of food sources. Maybe you can just kick it off and give a general consensus of like different types of food sources that are out there for whitetails.
Yeah, I think, probably the ones that we want to relate to most are the ones that can help us as hunters. Obviously, we want to help the deer if we can in general, but it's not really what most people are going to be focused on. They're going to want to focus on, what can help me be more successful as a hunter and help me maybe grow bigger bucks on my property. And so, of course, in the last 10, 15 years, everybody's really gotten into food plotting and planting a lot of high nutrition foods for deer, high caloric content, really, really nice foods for deer that also help them hunting. And of course, we got into hinge cutting, about in the same time period. And hinge cutting puts a huge amount of super high nutritious food down where whitetails can reach it. And both those things are really, really huge components. And I think one of the reasons that a lot of people have a lot of success killing a lot bigger deer nowadays is, you got deer, you have more big deer in the timber because they're getting better nutrition. I think nutrition is, it's become really, really something that land managers and people, anybody that can work on a piece of property, they're very interested in. What can I do to help my deer grow bigger? And at the same time, can that help me hunt them better,
Yeah, absolutely. JJ, you obviously are putting in a lot of food plots, right? But there's different types of food sources out there. What are you guys doing on the Whitetails from Scratch property from a habitat standpoint? Not necessarily food, but, could be bedding, thermal cover, that kind of thing. From a habitat standpoint, what are some of the things that you've experimented with or had success with?
Yeah, we're just constantly thinking of ways to make the property better, but, the bedding is kind of the main core building block. We went through the plans with AWS when you guys came up and mapped everything out.
We always call that a framework. A nice framework for everything.
I like the framework for it.
Sure.
Basically and we talk about sweeteners all the time as far as food sources go, the apple trees, the fruit trees, all the different types of food we have from the ag fields to our microplot systems. The water holes, even down to just attracting deer with scrapes and all kinds of things. But food plots has been a huge change in the way we've hunted, the way we've strategized our tactics the last few years for sure. Wherever you want to dive into strategy on that next, let's go down that road.
Yeah, Andy, I'd love to hear from you and kind of your strategy when you're hanging stands and picking out locations to hunt. So I know every property is different. Every hunting location is different. But when you're entering a property, walk me through that process of, okay, how am I going to hunt this property? How are you looking at these different food sources and trying to pick out where you're going to set up, potentially for the year?
Right. So I think, understanding, if you can possibly put it together where most of the deer on a property or where individual bedding pockets are. Maybe you've created those with hinge cutting. Maybe they exist naturally, but understanding that component is important. And then understanding where you can maybe get equipment or get to places to put in potential food plots, maybe a pond, things like that. Those are important aspects. And then how do you access that? If I've got this chunk of timber and there's a little open field CRP or something nearby, how am I going to get there and access that? Are there tree stand trees there? Will it have to be a blind situation? Trying to put those, 5 or 6 variables together at the same time and realize, hey, this will work. This situation right here will work. And okay, let's put we'll have some hinge cutting in the timber here, and we'll have a food plot relatively close by within, 100, 150 yards or so that you can access your stand and not spook deer on your way in, things like that. All those factors come into play, but just trying to understand those things and how they relate to each other and what can give you an advantage as a hunter, to be able to get to your spot and not spook deer, feed those deer that are close by, give them water that are close by, and give them that great bedding cover and the food component that hinge cutting provides as well. Then all of a sudden now you're talking about, all right, a deer has everything that they truly need. They're not like us. We can do whatever we want. I can go to a store, I can go to a restaurant, I can do all sorts of things. A bar, I find, you can do all those things. They can't. This is survival for them, and so those things are critically important. And when you provide them, it's the old saying: if you build it, they will come. If you provide those things for whitetails, they will utilize them. Yeah. It's really important.
Absolutely.
So, I got a kind of a question for you. Are there any spots that you ever hunt, throughout the season that you don't go in and implement some kind of tactic on beforehand? So like, you're obviously putting in food plots or water holes or doing hinge cutting or whatever. Like, are there ever any situations where you'll go in and hunt a spot and not do anything potentially to that spot before you go in and hunt it?
I would say, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think both is important. There are bucks, mature bucks, that just will not tolerate any kind of weird pressure and food plotting stuff and being in there messing with tree stands or other things, And so you really want to pay attention to those. Like, this is a deep sanctuary area on this property. I need to really pay attention and leave this alone. You guys might remember all the footage that came out of that area had the Tunnel of Pain. Yeah. We did nothing in there. I just couldn't do anything in there. It was all deep cut ravines. And anytime you were in there, you were giving your wind to that entire 20 acres. And so I stayed out of there. We chose to really just hunt it super, super secretive. And I think the key is to have both, because you're going to kill a percentage off your bucks off of just stock standard food plot setups where it's a food plot in a little pond and there's timber close by. You'll kill some off of those, but you're also going to kill some bucks that will just never show themselves. I think JJ's really understands that well. He's a master of that. Some of those bucks just will not play those games, and they're too mature, they're too wary, and so they're going to sneak around in those super, super sanctuary areas, When you agree, Jay?
Yeah, and while you're talking, I think it kind of depends on the area too. So if you got a buck that's doesn't have a lot of options for, depending on the area, how it lays out. And he's kind of grew up on your property, knows the food plot since he was a 1.5-year-old, a 2.5-year-old, 3-4. Mm-hmm. Well, that's different than if you're, like where I hunt in Wisconsin, there's just massive sections of timber and swamp and all this stuff out there where the bucks during the rut, they might come over and hit the property that I'm on, which I have a couple food plots. And that's like not familiar to them. So they're kind of looking at it. What's this thing? What's this food plot? What's this blind? They react like way different than the deer that grew up with all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. You got to kind of change up the tactics.
Yeah, for sure.
On the situation, maybe you see a lot of footage of our guys out there, and there's just fence lines. It's flat. It's not real rolly. There's just fence lines. They got kind of food plots tucked in. I'm assuming that's a different situation too, where there's not big bedding pockets. It's just kind of deer using fence lines and tree rows.
Yeah, for sure.
Each situation seems different.
Oh, for sure. I mean, every single piece of property, every single hunter, the hunters have different goals, hunting with different weapons in different ways, different times. It's super, super dynamic, but just trying to understand what you have in your, if you're hunting 10 acres or 500 acres or whatever it is, understanding what you have and how many of those places where you can have a significant advantage over whitetails and not put them in a position where they're uncomfortable, but where you can still get to where you need to get to. Because I think really that's the key. They always used to say, give him 10% of your wind. And I think at times that's really, really important for them to feel like they have an advantage. Yeah. That they're not walking into a blind situation with, the wind at their back.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, you've been doing a lot of work out on some of your ground here recently, improving roads, putting in some water holes, just kind of overall habitat improvements. Talk to me about some of those and how they're fitting into your overall strategy and kind of just the approach with, weeks leading up to the season here. You guys are getting pretty aggressive in making some of these changes. So just talk to me about, some of what's going on up there.
Yeah, really what the thought behind it is we have on our family farm, we have two different really high traffic areas, one on the north side and one on the south side. And we wanted different access points, so we put in new roads, had a skid in there, cleaned everything off, planting down some low-growing ryegrasses that are really shade tolerant, so you're getting in there really stealthy. But we also have put in 2 ponds that are about 10 to 15,000 gallons apiece. Brought in a mini excavator, dropped these ponds down 3-4 feet, shelves as they go, or as the deer come down into the water hole. really easy access for them, but the locations of both of these ponds that we just put in are on basically what we would call the pump houses into our main food sources. So where they're coming off, they're bedding off those hillsides, off of those benches, they're feeding off, and the first thing that they get to is the water. And we have stands strategically placed around these water holes. And it's going to be a huge advantage because we can sneak in there now without ever being detected from when they're bedding on these benches. And as they get into the food sources, they're hitting these water holes first before they go start filling their bellies.
Yeah, your property is kind of unique. You know, it's kind of this big hill that goes up, and it's this big ridge top once you get up there. But like, you know, everybody wants to talk about top access. Like, you don't have any top access.
We have zero top access. Like everything's from below.
Yeah, you have really one access point there. Mm-hmm. So you've really had to be strategic on how you're accessing these different parts because you're kind of going up through them, you know, to get to where you want to hunt them. So there's kind of a whole dynamic there.
The other thing that we've started to do is dropping trees to thicken up some certain areas where we're going to push bedding cells in, like what Andy does a lot with his hinge cutting. Although I'm not as brave, and I think it should be stated that hinge cutting should be done by guys like Andy. Like, if you're out with a chainsaw, don't be doing it just by yourself because it can be very dangerous. However, dropping trees in some certain areas, thickening up bedding, then we're able to keep these bedding cells away from our access trails for the most part.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting and I want to talk about a little bit is we talk so much about, you know, putting in food plots and putting in water holes and making these changes. And not that we make all these changes with big equipment. Some we do with big equipment, some we do with a hand rake. Other ones, you know, we're maybe just trimming a branch to create a mock scrape. So we do a lot of different things on different levels. But Andy, I want to pick your brain on somebody that's out there that maybe just has permission on a piece of ground and can't put in food plots or hunts public land or, you know, is limited on the equipment that they have. You know, what are some things that they can do from a strategy standpoint to maybe improve their odds, you know, if they don't have access to, you know, big equipment or just the ability to make some of the bigger changes that we talk about all the time?
Yeah, I think it's critically important for sure. They can be a huge draw in certain situations where you really don't have anything to concentrate deer in any particular area. You know, a small food plot, a medium-sized food plot, a big food plot, those things can make a huge difference, and we know that, and that's why, you know, so many people utilize them. They're just an amazing technique for us now to both feed deer and grow bigger deer and, you know, be able to hunt them and harvest them. And I hate to see guys underestimate, hey, you know, you can get a food plot in here. This is 1/4 of an acre or it's 1/8 of an acre. You know, one of my favorite stories about that years ago when I was first starting with all this stuff, you know, at some point somebody told me, you know, deer like oats. And I mean, I'm talking like 25 years ago. It was a long time ago. Nobody I knew was planting food plots, doing anything like that. And I went into this spot with my push mower. It was across a big creek and I couldn't get anything else over there. It really didn't have much else. I had a riding lawnmower, but I took a push mower and carried it across the creek, mowed out an area like the size of this room, maybe 20 by 25 in these trees. And I was going to plant some food in there, but in the process, I was carrying the bag of oats over there to plant the seed and it spilled. And so I did my best to plant a little area, but there was one place where a bunch of oats spilled, maybe, I don't know, two big bowls were spilled in one spot. Well, the deer came in during, you know, before the season, the deer came in and ate all the rest of those oats, but the place where they spilled grew into a little disc about 3 foot that was like just pure nuclear green of all these oats growing up. So the first time I climbed in that tree stand, I looked down, I'm like, oh yeah, that's where I spilled it. Over the course of that evening, 7 does came in and fed right out of that disc, and then a nice 8-pointer that I shot came in right just to feed out of that little. And I mean, I'm talking, this thing wasn't.
That's a microplot.
That's a microplot. Redefining microplots.
It was beyond microplot. It was, and that was, you know, clear with just like, again, a push mower and a rake. Mm-hmm. You know, so never. The only thing I would say is definitely don't ever underestimate how much impact you can have with small changes, because again, like we spoke before, the deer. This is their world. It's critically important for them. They're not playing any games out there. Any food source becomes extremely important to them immediately. A water source, I mean, it's super important to them. So don't underestimate what you can do getting out there with some elbow grease and manpower. I see guys, you know, use a 4-wheeler and a chain drag can plant a really nice plot. I've done it myself many, many times in areas where I couldn't get anything else. Using a backpack sprayer or a small sprayer to kill out what you know, and then drag them with a chain drag. A small disc if you can get one, or guys put those groundhogs on the back of a 4-wheeler. Anything you can do to break the soil a little bit, kill off what's there, and plant your own choices of something that's a high priority for deer. You put yourself in a great position just like that.
Yeah.
Really, really big difference.
Yeah, I was going to say, and if you are hunting a piece of property that you're not able to do anything, if the farmer says, I don't want you tilling up or breaking any dirt or anything like that. I have a few friends like that hunt on those type of farms. Focus on your fruit trees, your acorn trees, edge of egg fields, whatever those available food sources that are on that property, that's where the deer are going to naturally congregate. So it's a good thing to focus on. And if you can't get a food plot in, it's unfortunate, but there are other options.
Mm-hmm.
JJ, any tips on for somebody that can't necessarily, implement some of those bigger projects?
Well, I was just going to kind of piggyback on Brian's thing. We talked about it in different podcasts about ways to maybe, if you can't work the ground, you can always, if you got some egg fields that you can just add seed into as well, like your beans and your corn, plant those rye, those oats.
Clovers are great.
Into the corn or brassicas and beans. Like sometimes farmers will let you kind of toy around with the edge, or you just don't tell them.
Or you just...
bad idea. I don't know what else to say there. I was going to make a comment about, I didn't know I had the world record micro plot killer next to me. The guy that killed the buck on the smallest plot in the history of plots.
Yeah, literally a spilled little chunk of seed. I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it, but I watched it happen.
I'm doing that right in the middle of one of my food plots this year, just putting a 50-pound bag down, see how it goes.
First the turkeys come, like bunch just walking.
Yeah, I think, one of the things, some of the things I think about outside of just the food plot game, small implementation type things, even like improving, I'm a big fan of like mock scrapes or improving, already existing scrapes, just little tweaks there, maybe we talked about this in another podcast, but, visual cues. So, if you have a scrape that's already there, just trimming some branches around it, making it stand out more, creating mock scrapes where you want them. Andy's getting ready. He's loaded up on me here, so I'm going to let him talk in a second. But just like, creating scrapes where you want them to. It's anything that you can do to get those deer where you want them. It can be the smallest things, a simple mock scrape. But anything to put those deer where you want them, could potentially help.
Yeah, all those things.
Calm down. Go ahead.
I'm excited. All those things can definitely help. Of course, monitor your presence in the timber. Try and be surgical about this stuff. Don't just be out there wandering around and go, oh, look, there's a scrape. Oh, there's a rub. And just wander around. That's bad. But if you could be surgical somewhat about how you do it, and I was just going to share, when you mentioned that, it reminded me of one of my favorite things, a really, really good tip for guys is, a lot of times you have field edges and there'll be scrapes along the field edge that you're not intending to hunt or anything else, or you might have another property or be able to access somebody's woods somewhere. But one of the best tips I could ever give you on mock scrapes is cut the licking branch carefully with rubber gloves on off of a scrape on some other property close by, and then zip tie that licking branch to the existing licking branch you want to hunt. And you will not believe the amount of bucks that come and visit that. They are immediately aware that these are bucks I don't know. They can smell that on the licking branch, and they will hammer that scrape. It's an amazing technique.
That's a great tip.
Yeah, it works fantastic for getting pictures as well as hunting over. But anyway, just something.
Yeah, that's an interesting tip. Brian, I'm going to go, if you see me on your trail cameras, do not worry about it. I'm going to cut one of your licking branches down later this afternoon.
You see me on yours enough.
That's what I said something about the ones on field edges, because a lot of times you're not going to hunt those anyway, and they're nighttime scrapes, and so you're really not going to hurt anything by removing one of them and using it somewhere else. But don't do it on the property that you're hunting on, because that'll be covered by bucks that are in that area, and they'll already know it. It's got to be from a property, I would say, maybe a half mile on away, and then you're gonna have a whole new crew of bucks, and they will go crazy over those new smells on that licking branch. It's cool.
Now, is this something you've been doing for a while? Because I seem to remember watching you hunt over the years, and you can find this on YouTube, the Tunnel of Pain hunts. I think you killed 3 bucks 3 years in a row in about the size of a hula hoop area under the same licking branch.
Yeah.
Those
the licking branch was zip tied to that tree.
Yeah. That makes sense now.
It works great for pictures too. We've gotten this year had tremendous luck getting videos on field edge scrapes using that technique. We got so many videos this year of just all these different mature bucks hitting these scrapes on the edge of the field, and kind of cool. It's fun.
We'll have to work with the guys at Hodag with their licking branch system, and we'll have trades. Like, hey, you can type in, I'm from, Rochester, Mass. Trade
There you go.
licking branch.
And if you can't get one that's an existing licking branch off another property somewhere, take a branch that looks more or less like a licking branch and put crazy scents on it. Mess around. Put vanilla on there. Put chocolate on there. Put raccoon urine was one of my best picture getters back in the day. The coon urine that they sell at farm stores for trappers. Anything that's an intense scent like that, they're going to come and check it out. Especially when it's on a licking branch, they can't resist. It's like a fire hydrant in the middle of their territory.
Sure. Sounds like
Andy's a big scent. He does the tarsal gland trick too, where he shoots a buck and cuts him off and drags him around.
That's just as good a tip as those licking branches. Get and save tarsal glands off of other bucks as much as you can, or even does. Save their tarsal glands and then zip tie that tarsal gland to a licking branch, and you will not believe what happens.
Yeah, I know. I can remember when I was a kid, we were driving around one night, and it was by a property that we hunted. And this is actually a crazy story. I just remembered it. And there was a doe. It was during the rut, and there was a doe that got hit by a car on the side of the road, and there was a buck bedded right with her. Pretty nice buck, back for where we hunted in Pennsylvania. And I can remember my dad was all fired up. He's like, we gotta get the glands off that doe. Like we're gonna cut the tarsal glands off. So he cut them off, and I wasn't the next day, but it was in that same week. He ended up killing that same buck that was bedded right there with that doe, in the same week. It was wild. Yeah, kind of a crazy story.
That is crazy.
Kind of go along to what you said there.
When a doe's in heat like that and being chased actively and stuff, if you can, if that's a doe you end up shooting or whatever, those bucks know that smell, and the same as buck, she's peeing some on those tarsals, and it's a super powerful smell that they know exactly what it means, and they will seek it out and find it wherever you put it.
Yeah.
I had good luck. I guess that would be an add-on tip is tarsal glands off a mature buck like that will spook deer sometimes a little bit. So I would put it 50 to 75 yards upwind of you if you're going to hunt over it. If you're going to try and hunt over them. I've had a lot of deer come in, and if they get too close to it, they get kind of alarmed.
Figure out that age structure.
I get the time I'm talking about, I remember there was one night I had 32 deer on a hunt, which was a great big number back then where I was hunting. An average hunt, I would see 5 deer. I had 32 deer on a hunt one night, and I had a tarsal gland about 40 yards upwind of me. And they were all about 40 yards downwind of me, just noses in the air, just checking it out. And every buck that came in would sit down there and smell, and, but they wouldn't approach it and get right to it. So put it upwind of you a little ways.
Interesting. Very cool. Do you like to use Decoy at all?
Yeah, I do. I put together a snazzy decoy for this year. I'm switching to, I've used plastic decoys for a lot of years. The Carry Light, what is that called? The Carry Light, what's the Carry Light bug called? Easy Buck? All right. Anyway, and they make a fair amount of noise, and they're kind of hard to deal with, and they fall apart sometimes. If a buck does hit them when you're out in the woods, it sounds like 2 5-gallon buckets getting thrown together. It's a terrible sound. And so I had the idea through a friend of mine, Dean, was using these like the Delta target, the foam target. And so I looked around at the best target I could find that I felt like I could make a difference on, and I got a foam target, put stainless steel spikes in the legs that are sharpened, and they're welded in there, they're anchored in there so they can't move, and you literally just drop that decoy and it sticks in the ground, and then I flocked the entire thing.
Huh.
It's all flocked with...
Nice.
You're going to see it this year. I'm excited about it. Yeah, I love
it. Reminds me of a few years back after both my brother and I were tagged out. We did the exact same thing with I can't remember the name of the target, but you did one of the buck nuggets on it, and that thing got smashed by the same buck day after day after day. Go back out there and set it up, put it right in front of a trail camera. Now that buck is definitely on the hit list when he shows back up.
Yeah, the decoys is super fun, and there's definitely some tricks to it. It's a difficult thing to do, in my opinion, but it's a lot of fun. Makes for amazing encounters.
Yeah, while we're on the subject, I know personally, I've had good luck with decoys, and I've had lots of bad luck with decoys too. I think, while we're on it, is there any advice that you could give somebody that's thinking about using a decoy, definitely do this or definitely don't do this when you're using a decoy?
Yeah, for sure. Just through my experiences of failure, I would not put an excessive amount of scent on the decoy at all. In fact, I don't put any scent on the decoy. If I'm going to use scent associated with the decoy, it's 1 or 2 drops of buck scent, and I'll have it on the ground or on a wick that's just behind it, so that when I carry the decoy off, because what'll happen is, if you have scent on that decoy, you're going to get, and it's going to touch you, and then pretty soon it's on your hunting clothes, then it's on your truck, and it ends up everywhere. And you and I don't really maybe pay attention to that much, but a buck, a deer, they're so tuned into that they're going to pick you off. They're going to figure it out, and then they're mapping your access routes in and out because they smell that smell and everything else. So I wouldn't put much scent on your decoy. And then when you're using your decoy, once you stick it in the ground or get it set up or whatever, I would take a scent killing spray and spray that entire decoy, the ground all around it, and then walk backwards, spraying your steps as you move away from it 10 or 15 feet. And I mean, really coat that thing. And because they're just so tuned in about scent that if there's just the most minute amount of scent from when it was sitting around your house or by your garage or whatever, they're going to pick it up instantly. And if you can get something to just completely kill the scent on it, it really helps.
Yeah, right on. JJ, I know you guys kind of have a method on the way that you treat your decoys before you take them out.
Yeah. I haven't heard this.
We just leave them outside the entire year.
Leave them outside what?
We just leave them outside the entire year.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but we do, go through if it is sitting inside. Sometimes we bring it inside for a little bit in the garage or the shed. We'll go through and wipe it down with phase and clean it up, hose it down, let it dry, hose it down again. But for the most part, if you can just leave it outside, that's probably the best.
Yeah, I think that's key. And outside in an area that you don't have any scents.
Yeah, I guess we don't live in the city where it's
right. Any scents that are blowing towards it or would be around, I think immediately of a campfire or anything like that. You want to make sure it's in an area that doesn't have some scents blowing on it, car exhaust, anything like that. Yeah, so that it just literally is just leaching all that smell that it has out of it. So hopefully by the season it has just very little human odor, and then you cover the last of that with your spray and wash program. But yeah, it's critically important for sure to get all the scent off the decoy, because they're going to come right in, and the second they're going to always want to circle it downwind, and the second they get downwind of it, if it has anything wrong with it, they're just gone immediately, bolting out, sitting 100 yards away, blowing at you. Bad.
Yeah.
Like I have newfound excitement for a decoy now. He's got me excited.
Yeah.
Thinking of situations, scenarios.
Decoys can do some things really magically. I always try to tell guys, be super aware when you're gonna, I'm picking stands according to decoy stuff. You want to pick a particular stand. You don't want to just sit in the timber somewhere where nothing can hardly see. Decoy sets can be eyeballed beforehand and be phenomenal in places where there's a rise in the field maybe, and you want to have as many deer be able to see that decoy as possible. Maybe it's a buck. I remember the buck that Mike killed. That buck was 425 yards away, and I rattled, and he couldn't hear me, and I rattled some more with the black cracks. Nothing he would. And I needed to rattle really hard, and I told Mike, get on the binoculars and tell me if he looks up. And I rattled as hard as I could, and Mike said, he looked. And what did he see? He saw that decoy, and here he came 425 yards right into the decoy and gave him a perfect 15-yard shot. So try and hunt in areas where that decoy is maybe on at least a slight rise, where they can really, deer that are way down the field and maybe come out, they can see that buck. They may come look at it, especially calling tools, really effective.
So on that note, let's give away an Extinguisher Deer Call. To get entered, just go to any social media page, comment on YouTube, keyword Extinguisher. Just send it in a message to the Deer Society or Illusion, or comment on a post, or send us a comment, leave a comment on YouTube, send us an email, call Brian over there, tell him Extinguisher is the keyword. Yep. We'll get you entered in that drawing, and we'll pick a winner to win an Extinguisher Deer Call. Sound like a plan?
Sounds
good.
Perfect. Andy, is that all right with you over there?
Yeah, we're
sure you're good.
already entered while you're talking.
Perfect. I'm glad. Well, no, I think that's all good advice. JJ, what else do you want to add to that?
Well, earlier we talked about just other ways to attract deer. We're kind of tapering off the food plot conversation, and as you know, I always my backdrop or my backfall is always water. Like, I feel like there's nothing better than just a little water hole, whether it's man-made tank that we put in the ground or above ground, or a big cattle pond. I know you put in ponds pretty much on all the frameworks of your plans, AWS plans.
100%.
Small little water holes. I feel like at times there's nothing better than water. I would take it over a scrape, food plot, like pretty much anything. I feel like water is just
Especially if you can tuck it in and where it's in heavy maybe timber or on the edge, or just as good a cover as you can get it in. Not out in the middle in the open. Don't think out in the open. Always think in the cover if you can get it, because the more comfortable they are coming to it, the more look at the chances of them coming in. Look at Colton's buck. Look at my buck.
Yeah, and you can't.
small bucks. Mr. Maybe, big bucket.
You can't.
It's over 220 inches that came off tiny kill ponds in the woods in heavy cover.
Yeah, and don't underestimate the power of water when there's no available water in that general area. If you have something a half mile away, a creek running through, and you're able to if you're able to put a pond in a strategic location, that water hole is going to draw everything within that half mile every single day. They need to go to it.
Yeah, and it also allows you an opportunity to get pictures of every deer in the area, even when you're not there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Critically important to get those, because they're going to hit that water source.
Absolutely.
They're going to get their picture taken doing it. So if there's a buck in the area you wouldn't be aware of any other way, you'll be aware of him because of that pond.
Yeah. Yeah, and just taking that one step further, I mean, even if you do have, a lot of guys say, well, I have a creek running through my property, or I have water on my property, like, I would not discourage you at all from putting a water hole in, because you can put it where you want to put it. And deer love, Andy, you could talk about this, deer love drinking out of those little tiny, like, water holes.
Yes.
And if you can put them where you want to put them, just tips the advantage in your favor even more.
Right. That's a critical aspect of it for sure. You're putting it in a position that allows you an advantage as a hunter to get to it. Whatever that may be. It may be a depression out in the field or some cover that you can use. Whatever it is, where you have the advantage. Now you're putting the deer where you have the advantage instead of the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what you said a minute ago, I got to touch on, because it's just been such a sticker for me over the course of doing this advanced whitetail systems. Time and time again, I've had guys tell me, well, there's a creek running right through the property. There's a creek running right through the property, over and over and over. And then had those same guys send me pictures after we put a small pond in, a kill pond, or a series of them, or however many they have, that I killed him right over this little pond. I can't believe it. I killed him right over this little pond. There is something different about, I think that it's twofold. I think there's a taste thing that's happening, maybe a mineral content thing, that they prefer those little ponds, possibly. I don't know. And then secondarily, it's a convenience thing for sure, because if you ever think about it, every creek on a property, it's always downhill. They got to walk all the way down there, and then they got to come all the way back out. And a pond, if you're putting it in a location by a food plot or someplace that's easier for them to access within 100, 150 yards, 200 yards of a bedding area, it's just too convenient. They just can't turn it down. It's just so easy for them. They have to use it.
Yeah.
And they do, and in particular, the mature bucks do in the afternoons. It's just, what a pattern,
Well, the other point on that is if you don't historically get, like, you guys have been out to the family farm, it's really a pass-through area during the rut is when it's at its most effective. But ever since we put in that one pond, we're able to hold deer year-round that are continually staying in that area now, because they know they don't have to leave far to get that water, and they're finding other means of food when the food plots aren't out there.
Mm-hmm. I think the key is tucking that into some security that's really close by.
Yep.
The hunt breakdown that we did for Andre, the buck I shot last year, without a doubt, water was the key. Just added that little water hole next to the food plot. Wisconsin on the driveway.
Yep.
Along the driveway there.
That reflection buck.
Yeah, I mean, in partnering that up with food next to it, so I had a little clover plot, the Easy Greens clover plot, little water hole, bedding close by. You didn't have to leave and go out into the open to the big pond that you could sit in the house or the neighbors could see.
Yeah.
Didn't go down to the river, none of that stuff. Were a lot more human activity, but yeah, just kind of tucked in a little spot, couple acres of bedding. Little food source, little water hole, first time in, daylight.
Yeah, there's a reason we call them kill plots and kill ponds. I mean, that's what they effectively do, because those bucks don't want to leave that cover. How many times have you seen a buck come to the edge of the opening, come to the woods, the edge where everything opens into the field, and they just stop? When they stand there for 10 or 15 minutes, just looking, waiting for it to get dark, because he's not going to go out in that open. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And when you can provide water in an area where he doesn't have to go in the open, you've got the advantage now all of a sudden.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty cool. On the deer I shot last year in Minnesota, like we got to witness that and film it. You know, that deer came out and he stood there for 15 minutes. And I think so many times that happens, and as hunters, like we never see him, you know, and we think, oh, we didn't see a buck tonight, or, you know, the deer must have done something different or whatever, when he was maybe just inside the timber and he was waiting for it to get dark, or there was something he didn't like. And, you know, it's so cool to be able to see them do that. And if you can give them something in the cover, make them feel comfortable there, you know, just increases your odds so much more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's one other good point when you're doing water sources is keeping them in the cover where you're not in direct sunlight all day long. That evaporation, you don't have to fill them as often. If you're in the shade, the standing of that water is going to last a heck of a lot longer than if it isn't.
Yeah, if it's in the shade, it's true. One time I was on a hunt and watched a buck. Literally, there was a guy that climbed into a ladder stand halfway through my hunt, about 100 yards away. And towards dark, this big 8-pointer came out. He was about 50 yards from me. He never gave me a shot, but he came to the edge just like I'm talking about, stood there for a little while, and then it got towards dark. And right about dark in that blue twilight, that guy climbed out of his ladder stand. And I watched that buck. He made a little couple, like a little steel ping, kind of thing going on. And that buck heard it and looked over at him and just watched him climb out of his ladder stand and walk through the middle of the field 30 yards away. Just watched him walk all the way to his truck.
No kidding.
Didn't do a darn thing. Didn't move, didn't do nothing. He just watched him. I think sometimes, we can, not all bucks, but we can definitely underestimate the intelligence sometimes of the animals that we're hunting. Don't underestimate them. They're super, super crafty at living in the area they live. And so when you give them something like those little ponds that they can utilize and think that they're being sneaky and nobody's looking at them.
Yeah.
That's why they're so effective.
Yeah.
They feel like they have the advantage.
Well, I think, overall takeaway from this podcast is definitely like, don't underestimate the changes that you can make to benefit yourself as a hunter, whether they're big changes or the smallest of changes, food or water related. There's always something that you can do to try to tip those odds in your favor a little bit, whether it's, again, food, scrape, pond, little tank, that you dig in the ground. Lots of ways to tip the odds in your favor. So never underestimate that. We're going to wrap this up here. Hunting season is almost here, basically here. Guys are shooting deer already in some of those southern states. So good luck out there hunting. Appreciate you listening. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, download the free Deer Society app. Lots more tips, strategies on there. So we appreciate you listening. Don't forget to message that keyword extinguisher to a social platform or email. We'll get you in on that drawing to win an extinguisher. So good luck out there in the woods. Thanks for listening.
All our sponsors here at Deer Society are partners whose equipment we know we can trust are going to make you more successful and have a better experience in the field. Products like Illusion Systems, maker of the Black Rack, the Extinguisher, and the Phase Body Odor System. Tacticam, Reveal Cell Cameras, 10-Point Crossbows, Onyx Maps, Osseo Gear, Hooyman, and Big Frig.